solutions. Hard objects are never observed spontaneously to transform themselves into abstract ideas. To ascribe to electrons in our brain the property to generate consciousness and not to ascribe the same property to electrons moving in a bulb is in contradiction with quantum physics.
Okay. Otangelo, do you believe that electrons are the core component of how neurons talk to each other?
I don't know. I am not a neuroscientist like you are.
It's not electrons. It's not electricity that's coursing through our brains. That's not how it works.
Okay.
I recently had a live stream with Pitch Lumin, aka Nathan. This was a follow-up conversation to one that we had a couple of weeks ago, just touching on a couple of topics that we still needed to discuss. A relatively prominent young earth creationist, goes by the name Otangelo, who's written a number of books on religion and creationism, came on the stream as well. There were a bunch of very interesting topics that were discussed. Otangelo diverted the conversation away from talking about how Satan influences media and influences the world, which is a totally bizarre conversation on its own. I encourage you to look at the live stream if you're interested in seeing more about that. He changed that conversation away from that to bring up the issue of mind-body dualism. Mind-body dualism is the idea that there's a separate entity, the mind, or aka spirit, that somehow interacts with our physical body, aka the brain. This is a philosophical debate that has been argued for centuries. I would argue, as a neuroscientist, that there isn't room for mind-body dualism, that the mind is completely a manifestation of the activity of neural circuits that are in the brain. The brain is an incredibly mechanical structure, and we are learning more and more about it every single day. And everything that we know about the brain is that it has the capacity to result in the emergent properties of things that you might call consciousness and mind, and there isn't enough space for woo and ghosts and spirits to be touching on our brains and influencing the activity there. So this is a clip from that conversation. I hope you enjoy. If you like this content, please like and subscribe.
You can see the promotion of music. Like my music that is popular for my generation is hip hop, and a lot of it is like it's all promoting indecency and violence and making a killing, not a living. And people, it's art, it's metaphor, but that's how these people get by with being able to do this type of stuff. Because like if the Bible was fake, why did the Grammy performer just have a completely satanic thing? Why do people make songs about? I've heard some music that I could play a song for you where it's like they call it satanic rap, Luciferian music, and they talk about how they'll worship the Baphomet and laugh, and you like
it's a pose. It's not real.
Well, then, Chris, let me ask you, how do you know that the spiritual world is just an imagination? How do you explain our existence without God?
No. So let's go to the spiritual world and our imagination. So I'll take the first question. So what do you mean by spiritual world? Can you define that?
I think that our thoughts, our mind, our imagination, our feelings, our rememberings, that is part of the spiritual. It is immaterial. If you open your skull, your brain, and search for the location of your thoughts, you will not find a physical place that you can point to and say, well, this is where your thoughts are stored. It doesn't exist.
Because it's distributed across multiple circuits, and it involves like the summation of sensory systems that pass through the first through the entorhinal cortex, then through the dentate gyrus, then through the CA3 to the CA1, back to the entorhinal cortex, then to other cortical areas. We actually know quite well how episodic memory is stored within the brain, and you can look at activity of neural circuits, when an animal is doing something or thinking something, and see correlation of neural activity that goes right along with whatever they're doing. You can even see dreaming. You can put an animal through a maze and monitor brain activity in the hippocampus as it's going through the maze, and monitor the activity of what we call place neurons. And that is essentially a map of them going through a maze. And then when they fall asleep, they do the same thing. They can replay the same thing. So they're dreaming about going through this maze all day. We see even in birds, they do the same thing. They will dream about song in the brain circuits that regulate singing behavior in songbirds. We know that human beings have a hippocampus, that it works exactly the same way as it does in rodents, and that, like, of course, it's going to do the same thing.
Let me quote you here from a guy, his name is Marco Biagini. He says, science has in fact proved that all chemical, biological, and cerebral processes consist only in some successions of elementary physical processes, determined in their turn only by the laws of quantum mechanics. Such a view of biological processes does not allow to account for the existence of consciousness, which existence implies then the presence in man of an unphysical element.
I really disagree with that. I think that's a bunch of nonsense. Well, first of all, I don't even know why quantum physics enters into this issue. Like, we're talking about 86 billion neurons that exist within the brain, with literally thousands of connections between each set of neurons. So it's vastly complex in many, many ways. But we can understand underlying processes of emotion processing, logic, and reasoning. We know the areas of the brain that are involved in this. And I mean, do we have it completely solved? No, I wouldn't pretend to say that. But every single day, we fill in more and more gaps. And at this point, it's utterly clear that consciousness is absolutely a manifestation of the activity of neural networks. Well, there's no other way around it. Because, okay, so first of all, let's go back, because you asked an interesting question. And I think that, like, one thing that we need to deal with is definition. So when you say spirit, what does that mean? Define that. How does this, when you say the spirit world interacts with our thoughts, I think I might know what you mean, but how do you define spirit?
Okay, let me quote you here. Consciousness englobes the mind, qualia, intellectual activity, calculating, thinking, forming abstract ideas, imagination, introspection, cognition, memories, awareness, experiencing intentions, free volition, free creation, invention, generation of information. It classifies, recognizes, and judges behavior, good and evil. It is aware of beauty and feels sensations and emotions. Hard objects are never observed spontaneously to transform themselves into abstract ideas. To ascribe to electrons in our brain the property to generate consciousness and not to ascribe the same property to electrons moving in a bulb is in contradiction with quantum physics.
Okay. Otangelo, do you believe that electrons are the core component of how neurons talk to each other?
I don't know. I am not a neuroscientist like you are.
It's not electrons. It's not electricity that's coursing through our brains. That's not how it works.
Okay.
It is, there's a change in voltage that occurs that has to do with ions like sodium and potassium being distributed across membranes, and then those membranes opening up that allows for the transference of that change in voltage across a membrane down to the end of the neuron to release on it, so that the synapse will then, release neurotransmitters that can then act on the neurotransmitters of the postsynaptic cell to induce a similar change in the next neuron.
Well, the big problem,
there's no electrons in it. It's not like a circuit, like an electrical circuit. So,
well, the big problem.
You still didn't answer my question. What does spirit mean? What is that?
Well,
define it.
I mean,
like if I tell you I believe in trees, I could tell you what a tree is, right? I can describe its attributes. So do that for spirit.
You cannot give a physical description because it is not physical.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, I'd say like maybe your essence. If I had to try, maybe like your essence, your being.
You're just using concepts. Like, that doesn't tell me what it is.
Well, this is a philosophical question, which has been
saying spirits so where in the brain does the spirit interact to allow me to vocalize, for instance, right? Because presumably I'm using my consciousness to create these thoughts and vocalize them through my speaker that is now going through your headphones. So where is that intersection? Because I know that there are muscles that are under control of neural circuits that I actually know quite well, because I have worked on the neuroscience of vocalization and learning. And so I'm curious, where is that intersection between, I guess, the spirit world or domain or dimension? How does it act on the neurons to then cause my brain to, like, is it Broca's area? Is it Wernicke's
area? It's your free will. And it's your, like, when you want to say you're sitting in a chair and then you just think of the tree outside of, like, you choose to think of the tree outside in your yard.
Okay.
It's your ability, your spontaneousness, your spontaneity, your ability to
we know that does create activity within the visual cortex. If you sit there and imagine something, the visual cortex will light up.
Well, you are going to have physical things because it's connected. Like the spirit is connected to the mind, which is connected to the physical, the mental, the emotional.
How is it connected to the mind?
There is a problem which is called the hard problem of consciousness. And that means that science or philosophers, they do not have an answer to your question. So it is open. I cannot answer it, and nobody actually.
It's speculation. The how is speculation.
Maybe it's not spirits. Maybe it's gremlins or leprechauns. Maybe there's a gremlin that's invisible that is controlling my thoughts using gremlin fingers.
What would there be in terms of we could
just make
image of who might be at the works behind this? Like, would there be any particular image? Well, there is something called a Baphomet, which is a goat head on a human body, represents transhumanism and everything. But this Baphomet is which is prominently featured oftentimes with a pentagram, which you did make a video the other day, Chris, on the Washington DC, the layout, how it's missing one strip out of basically an upside down star, which is blatant Satanism. That upside down star represents the chin of the goat, and then the two horns are the upside down 2 points of the star. It's supposed to look like a goat head. So Satanists will overlay this goat head on top of this pentagram. Now,
you will have a very big problem, Dr. Chris, when it comes to explain NDEs and the phenomena of people actually having near-death experiences. I've just linked here in the private chat. You can look it afterwards after our conversation. But there are people which invest their entire life to investigate these phenomena, and there are very good books. And you cannot just say, well, it's a hallucination. There are reported cases of clinical death, and these people, they report when they come back that they have gone to other rooms far distant from their physical body. They saw objects there and they described them in details, and the medics, they have confirmed that these objects were actually in these other rooms, exactly where the patient described they were. So this demands an explanation. We are not talking about one or two cases. We are talking about hundreds, thousands, 10,000s of cases of people who report they had NDEs. Some have seen Jesus, some have seen heaven, others have seen hell. So this is one of the strong evidences that a spiritual realm exists. And I mean, you can just ignore it and say this is just hallucinations. But if you have so many reports, then you do better to actually take that seriously.
Especially if they have that level of accuracy of describing objects in the nearby room. And, honestly, I think a lot of that kind of testimony is, I would have to question the motivations of the people who are making some of that testimony. Because there are plenty of other people who have died, but they didn't have any sort of near-death experience. And then they just woke up, right? Like, it's not like a consistent thing. So I want to go back to sort of consciousness and how that manifests in ourselves, right? I believe, my opinion is that consciousness is a large part of it is an emergent property that comes from the fact that we have a highly interactive set of language circuits in the brain. So there was a neuroscientist in the late 1800s. His name was Wernicke, and he was working with patients who had a certain kind of stroke that resulted in aphasia. Aphasia is, basically the inability to speak properly. And this is an example of what's called fluent aphasia and sometimes called Wernicke's aphasia. So this is a patient who has a stroke. Hopefully you'll be able to hear it. Let me know if you can't. I have this open in Edge, so I'm hoping this will work. So we're going to look.
Hi, Byron. How are you?
I'm happy. Are you pretty? You look good.
What are you doing today?
We stayed with the water over here at the moment, talk with the people over them over there. They're guiding for them at the moment. But they'll save in the moment. He'll water person for him. With luck for him.
So we're on a cruise and we're about to
We will sort it right here and they'll save their hands right there for them.
And what were we just doing with the iPad?
Right at the moment, they don't show a darn thing.
The iPad that we were doing. Like here?
I might change for me and change hands for me. With happy. I would talk with Donna sometimes. We're out with them. Other people are working with them. I'm very happy with them.
Okay.
This girl was fairly good and happy. And I play golf and hit other trees. We play out with the hands. We save a lot of hands on hold for us, other hands. I don't know what you get, but I talk with a lot of hand for hand. Sometime. I talk of any more to say it.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, and I hope the world lasts for you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
Okay. Hopefully you were able to see that.
Yep.
So what are your thoughts about this? Do you feel that this...
Can you tell us your name?
Oh, crap. Hold on.
And Mike, when was your stroke?
Oh, wait. Actually, you know what? Let's watch this. This is another good one.
Mike Caputo.
And Mike, when was your stroke?
I was 7 years ago.
Okay.
And
what did you used to do?
Worked Autodesk, seven sales and worldwide, and very good. Yeah.
Okay. And who are you looking at over there when you turn your head?
That's my wife.
Okay. And why is she helping you to talk?
She's a speech.
So you have trouble with your speech?
Yeah.
And what's that called?
Aphasia.
All right. And so why don't you work now?
I do.
And what do you do now?
Voices of Hope, aphasia.
And what is Voices of Hope?
Peterburg, and Dr. Hinckley, and myself, founder for me, and I members members probably 60 people.
So 60 people are part of Voices of Hope,
Yes.
which is an aphasia support group
Yes.
that you founded.
Yes.
And Dr. Jackie Hinckley is part of that.
Yes.
Okay, great.
It's not a support.
No,
It's
programs. It's
Okay. Thoughts? Did you notice differences between those two guys?
Yeah.
What did you see?
Well, one was a little bit more all over the place. The second guy was
fluid aphasia. It's sometimes called word salad. The first guy, yep.
And then
just kind of talking. And the second guy, though, what?
And then he was able to kind of stay on track a little bit more, but he also had his wife there to help guide him.
Because he couldn't really form the words and string sentences together very well.
Mm-hmm.
So
I make the analogy. I make the analogy when someone plays a piano, you have the piano and you have the pianist. If you destroy or damage the piano, then the pianist, he is 100%, but the piano is damaged, so it will not be able to play the piano 100%. And I think that's the same in regards of the brain. You damage the brain, then the soul obviously cannot use it compared to a normal brain to operate.
So it's all connected. Like spiritual goes down to your emotion, goes down to your mental, goes down to your physical. So if you have a damage somewhere in that line.
Okay. Yeah, the emotional. So you're talking specifically the amygdala? The amygdala is a core emotional center of the brain, or you mean more like the medial prefrontal cortex, or
as far as the specific region,
modular.
like the regions that you describe would be like the physical manifestation of where the emotion is physically resonating would be those regions.
This is a great point that Mariana brings up. So the pianist, you know, interesting analogy. The pianist has to physically interact with the piano, right, in order to actually make music.
Because we're in a physical world.
Right. And our brains are physical. You would agree with that, right?
Yeah.
So how does a spirit pianist play a physical brain piano?
Yeah, it's a mystery. We don't know.
Okay.
Yeah. We don't know.
I don't find that being particularly compelling. And the other thing is, like, about these two cases, part of the reason why I showed these two cases is that one guy clearly has some understanding of what's going on. He can comprehend what's being told to him. He's having a difficult time forming the words because he has damage specifically in Broca's area, which is another neuroscientist who discovered this area working with stroke patients. That seems to be really, really critical for being able to put words together in the proper way. The Wernicke's area patient in a different area of the brain that's highly connected to Broca's area, but a separate area of the brain, most closely to like the junction of the parietal, occipital, and temporal lobe is where the Wernicke's area is located. That's where that person had damage, and that it results in comprehension deficits. So the person cannot comprehend anything that's being told to him, nor can he comprehend anything that he's saying, but he still has an intact Broca's area, so he can string the words together and they're just kind of flowing out because none of it actually means anything to him. And it's really kind of sad with Wernicke's patients. I mean, both are very sad, right? Mm-hmm. But with Wernicke's patients in particular, they're completely lost. They have absolutely no understanding of who they are or where they're going or those kinds of things. Yeah. So I suppose in your analogy, that would mean that that's a pretty core part of the piano that's been broken.
So Dr. Chris, let me ask you this. Yeah. This is from Michael Egnor. He asks here, the brain can be cut in half, but the intellect and will cannot. The intellect and will are metaphysically simple. How would you respond to that?
Well, there's actually some really interesting things about split brain patients. So you're talking about cutting the corpus callosum so that we can deal with patients who are struggling with epilepsy, grand mal seizures. So if you cut the split brain patient, so you cut the corpus callosum, now you prevent neural activity that may be caused in one part of the brain spreading over the entire brain. So if you slice down the corpus callosum to split the brain, now interesting things start to happen, especially around language. In fact, I can find some slides about that.
There's people who have had their brain split in half, and then they're able to do something with their left hand using the right side, and their right hand using their left side.
So that's not exactly where the decussation occurs within the nervous system. That's actually more in the medullary pyramids in the medulla. That's where that split occurs that allows for the right brain to control the left side and the left brain to control the right side. The corpus callosum is a series of axons that are in the dorsal portion of the brain, and it's more about cortical interconnectivity. So having one part of the cortex talk to the other part of the cortex, and there's distinct processing that happens in either side of the brain. And around language, there's some really interesting lateralization that we see in the brain. Not much of the brain is very lateralized, meaning like one side of the brain does one thing and the other side does another thing. But what we find is that most of the specific rules of language comprehension is mostly controlled on the left side of the brain in most humans. And then the right side actually has a lot of the emotional salience of what we can observe of language. So intonation, what we call prosody, which is putting emotion into our language, that's generally regulated by the right side. So people who have damage on the right side, they tend to not have major speech deficits. They can comprehend, they can form words, but it turns out they lack the ability to have much emotion in their language, and they have and they speak in a very, very monotone way. But I suppose that must be another part of the piano, right?
Let me quote you this here from Jon Lief. I can give you the link afterwards. The fact that OBEs can be stimulated in the laboratory clearly demonstrates that the sense of I, the self-identity, can be separated from the body consciousness. Studies of body maps are also consistent with this view because they show that body consciousness is constantly changing through neuroplasticity. Therefore, ultimately, the sense of self is independent of the body sense, although normally extremely associated with it. The sense of I or identity is also ordinarily very attached to the self-perceptions involving our professions, families, and other strongly held beliefs and feelings.
Okay. I'm not entirely sure I follow all of that, but so I teach a class on neuroplasticity, so I can comment a little bit about the role of neuroplasticity and how it can shape enormous aspects of our output. Generally, the brain is largely static. It doesn't actually change too much. It ages, it gets bigger. You lose most of the most number of synapses that any one of us will have is at about age 6 to 8 years old, and then you will lose your synapses as you get older. The brain continues to get bigger up until about age 25. And interestingly, almost every single neuron in the brain is born by the time you are 18 months of age. So there's enormous limitations to the capacity for regeneration in the brain. There's only one exception to that in the human brain, which is the hippocampus, which is obviously, as we've already discussed, critically important for encoding episodic memory. So this is where I'm showing the corpus callosum. So this is how one part of the brain will talk to the other part. So these are white matter tracts, which is what axons are. And in some epilepsy patients, they have to slice through that corpus callosum to break it. And this is showing like the distribution of like how the brain is largely split. This is true for the visual system. It's true for our motor control, our somatosensory input. But with split brain patients, what we find is that if they are asked to read words or touch objects on the left side of their body, that means that the left side of the body is seeing the word, the right brain part of the brain is seeing the left side of the body, okay? And that some of that information obviously needs to get to the language centers, which is located on the left side of the brain. But if they're a split brain patient, that information that gets into the right hemisphere cannot get to the language centers, and they don't think that they even see an object, nor can they even feel, they don't see an object and they don't feel it because they cannot articulate it, because that information cannot leave the right hemisphere, the visual system or the somatosensory system, and get over there. So this is an illustration of how this works, right? So in a normal individual, if the object is over here, the patient, is supposed to be looking with their eyes, the gaze would be on the left side of their visual field. So it'll be located in the right side of their visual cortex, the right cortex. That information has to cross the corpus callosum to get to the language centers so the person can articulate that those things exist. When you have a split brain patient, that information gets to the right cortex, but then they're completely ignorant of the fact that they have anything in their left, or that they can see anything in the left side of their visual field. Now, if you switch it, if the information is now on the right side of the visual field, well, that information gets to the left cortex, which is not going to be blocked because you don't have the split corpus callosum, which means it has access to the Broca's area, and then they can articulate that this exists. So I'm kind of curious, is this trying to figure out where the piano is and exactly where the spirit part comes in?
Well, the entire part here is the piano, and as I said, the spirit part, it is like the not physical.
Okay, and so where does the spirit part come in? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Is it at Broca's area? Is it Wernicke's area? Is it the visual?
Well, this is science. So this is in the natural realm. So trying to I think that trying to put it to a supernatural spirit, that is that's admitted that is something that is on faith, and that is not something that we can scientifically determine.
Right.
You can't put it on a graph.
You can't even describe what spirit is. What does that mean?
Yeah, but if you come down to the bottom, what we try here to elucidate is this: is there effectively two components here, a spiritual realm and a physical realm, or is it all physical? right?
And presumably the interaction place is in the brain, right?
Yeah. And if we just try to find out by what we are doing now, we will not get anywhere, because science doesn't have an answer to that question. We cannot answer it. I cannot answer it. I can just give you what I believe. I am a dualist. But if you ask me, well, how do you know? I cannot answer it. I just know that the interaction works. I know that I can think about moving my arm, and that interface works. But how it works, I don't know.
Right. Like, is it at the molecular level? Like, is there a spirit channel? Like, is it a particular receptor? Like, for instance, in the brain, we have neurotransmitters.
I don't think it would
a
have
neuron
a receptor.
releases a chemical, and then it acts on the neurotransmitter receptor to induce change in brain activity. I'm wondering where in the chain of how we know neurons work is where the spirit comes in to manipulate the activity to then allow shaping, right? Because presumably you think that, like, it's my spirit that's causing me to talk to you, right now. I presume that you guys believe that. And but I'm using my larynx to produce the vocalizations that I'm doing, which involves the activation of muscles in my larynx to control the vocal cords, as well as the muscles that control my respiration to force the air out of
physical expression.
Yes, and we know how the nervous system works for that. And then we also are learning an awful lot about the language centers that are involved. Like, the fact that I can string a number of words together so that it's comprehensible involves the fact that I have a working Broca's area and a working Wernicke's area.
I actually had
one or the other. Now it makes it almost impossible for that to occur.
Those are the physical regions that allow us to make that interpretation.
Right. So where does the spirit fit in? That's what I want to know.
Yeah. You know, I had a debate on MDT about evolution, and my initial presentation was in regards of the interdependence of the speech, of human speech. And that was my argument to refute the claim that we have a common ancestor with apes. And my argument was that, this is something which you cannot explain. You don't have the answers, right?
This is a book that's nearly 600 pages long and has nearly 100 pages of references on the evolution of language, which is actually part of what I worked on my PhD on.
Well, I will give you the link in regards
to this book. This is a super interesting book. Tecumseh Fitch, he's a relatively famous scientist at the University of Vienna. I encourage you. He's got really great lectures. You can even go online and look at some of the lectures that he's written about the evolution of language.
Okay. My argument,
scientist, a neuroscientist.
Okay, my argument was this: that human speech and communication depend on 9 principal factors that work in an interdependent fashion, which is 1, consciousness and memory; 2, a language; 3, the entire system and mechanics.
So it was at this point that Otangelo took the conversation into irreducible complexity. He was arguing that speech is an irreducibly complex system within human beings, and that it can't be explained, the origins of which cannot be explained by evolution. So anyway, I'm going to cut it off there. If you're interested in this kind of content, please like and subscribe, and I really appreciate you watching. Bye-bye.